Hello, and welcome to the telephone town hall for the 34th Legislative District. I am Emily Alvarado. I'm your state senator, and I'm so excited to be serving as your senator, being appointed into this position from being your state representative. This is a really challenging legislative session. We know that right now, many people, I've heard from so many people who are concerned about what's happening at the federal level and what the impacts here are in Washington. I know that I'm worried about what it means for protecting civil rights and reproductive rights and protecting our democracy. And we will continue to fight to uphold Washington values here in Washington. I also know we have a serious budget challenge. We have a real budget shortfall. And I know personally that I'll be fighting to make sure we have the resources we need to invest in the community and public services that our communities deserve. Services like public education, like our social safety net, and like healthcare. I also know we're hearing a lot from people about the rising cost of living, our need to create more housing, making sure we maintain our commitment to protecting our environment and keeping our communities safe. And we're working hard in Olympia to do all those things. I'm now serving in the Senate on the labor, housing, and on transportation committees. And I look forward to answering your questions and hearing what's important to you.
I'm Joe Fitzgibbon. I'm one of your two state representatives. And I, again, would thank you for spending your St. Patrick's Day evening with us to hear about the work that we are doing on your behalf in Olympia. As you heard from Senator Alvarado, the biggest focus of this session is on balancing the state budget, that budget that pays for K-12 education, higher education, healthcare for many millions of Washingtonians, the Washington State Patrol, the state ferry system, our state highways, our prison system, the foster care system, and much more. As you heard from Emily, we have a significant budget shortfall this year as the revenues collected by the state of Washington have not kept pace with the cost of providing the services that we all count on for our public schools and beyond. One of the reasons for that is that Washington has one of the most regressive tax structures of any state in the country. It falls very heavily on poor and working class Washingtonians, whereas the wealthiest people in our state pay very little in taxes. So that's one of the factors that we are using to formulate our solutions to the budget shortfall. We are looking at both budget reductions in places that we think make sense, as well as revenue increases in places that we think make sense for folks who don't currently pay their fair share to support our state. The other thing that I spend a lot of my time working on is climate change. And of course, during a time when we see the federal government being run by climate deniers who are working very hard to support the fossil fuel industry, we here in the state of Washington are trying to maintain and accelerate our progress towards a clean energy future. And I am optimistic that we are going to come out of this session with some meaningful steps forward in the fight against climate change.
And I'm Brianna Thomas, the newest member of the 34th Legislative District. It is almost my second month on the job, and I've had the sincere pleasure of meeting with 60 different groups of 34th constituents. You all are active, you are engaged, you are passionate, and you will not take no for an answer. I've had the opportunity to serve on the Post-Secondary Educational Workforce Development Committee, along with the Housing Committee, and our Technology, Economic Development, and Veterans Committee. I'm learning on the job in this job during these dire times isn't the easiest, but I am hopeful that we as Washingtonians will do this together because I know how much you care. I see it on the front steps of the Capitol every day, whether we're fighting for working people and working families or making sure that Washington is Washington-proof. These are truly unprecedented times, but I am very pleased and proud and honored to be part of the delegation that's doing the good work every day. Both of my colleagues touched on our budget and our tax code, and it's been brought to my attention that we're behind Idaho and Oregon when it comes to our tax infrastructure, and I can't think of anything else we're behind Idaho or Oregon on. So we are working diligently on turning that precedent the right side around. And with that, I will mention to you that if you have a question for us, please press 0, and a moderator will get to you. That's press 0 to ask a question.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. My name is Jen, and I'm moderating this event tonight. And as the representative said, if you have a question for your lawmakers, please press 0 on your phone keypad, and you'll be placed directly in the question queue. Once again, we're on the line live with Senator Emily Alvarado, Representative Joe Fitzgibbon, and Representative Brianna Taylor. So please press 0 if you have a question for your lawmakers. We do have some questions that were pre-submitted. So we'll start with that while the other questions are rolling in from folks who are pressing 0. One question that came in, and I know folks said a little bit about the state budget situation, but we have a question that says, we have a budget crisis. To cover the deficit, we should not raid Climate Commitment Act funds or cut essential state services. What actions are you taking to make our funding system more progressive, and how can we help make it happen? Turning it over to the lawmakers.
So I will start with the Climate Commitment Act. I was very proud to have played a role in passing that law in 2021. It's our state's cornerstone climate change law. And it brings in billions of dollars that we're investing in the transition to a clean energy future, in recovering salmon population and fighting wildfires, and investing in our transportation network. And Washington voters overwhelmingly voted to maintain the Climate Commitment Act last November. We have seen some proposals from House and Senate Republicans to take Climate Commitment Act dollars and spend them on other things. I oppose that. I think that it's important that we maintain the promise that those dollars will go towards their intended purposes. But there's a lot of work that we have to do to close that budget deficit. And among the strategies that I think that we will be looking at will be asking the wealthiest businesses in our state and the wealthiest people in our state to pay more of their fair share. We're looking at solutions big and small. We just heard a bill today in the House Appropriations Committee, which is the only committee I serve on, to increase liquor license fees, which haven't been increased in many years, but to ask folks who sell beer, wine, and spirits to pay more for their annual license fee for the privilege of selling intoxicating substances. So we're going to be looking at strategies both big and small. That's an example of one of the smaller ones, but I think that the big strategies that you will see come forward very soon to close that budget deficit will include asking the wealthiest in our state to pay more of their fair share.
Yeah, this is Emily speaking. Just to add as a reminder to folks that our state is heavily reliant on 3 taxes: sales, property, and business taxes through B&O. And so when we talk about being short of revenue, part of it is because middle class and working people haven't been buying as many things. That's what impacts our sales tax collection. And so we need to look at diversifying where we get our taxes from, and to do it in a way that's just more fair, looking to corporations, looking to wealthy people to help make sure that we have more consistent and stable resources, because we also know that we need to invest in our community. We need to invest in education. We need to invest in healthcare, especially at a time when we see significant federal cuts. We need to be stepping up. If the Department of Education is leaving, we need to make sure we're funding our schools. When you see potential cuts in Medicaid, really need to know that we're investing in our healthcare system here. And we'll do that through a range of more progressive revenue options.
One of the things we have to keep in mind is the way budgets are structured, both at the state, county, and local levels. There are limitations on where we can make adjustments. There are buckets of money that are earmarked for specific purposes. This is why Representative Entman introduced a revenue bill that is regressive, will acknowledge it, but does give counties and cities the ability to raise additional revenue specifically for public safety, and specifically for public safety with the behavioral health bent, with alternatives to gun and badge responses that we've heard clearly from our communities folks would like to hear, would like to see on the ground in our neighborhoods. That gives both the city and the county more room in their budget as well to provide more direct services to the social safety net. It gives them more flexibility. And with that, we'll send it back to Jen.
Thank you, Representative Thomas. So we do have our first live question. Catherine is calling with a question about rent stabilization. Go ahead, Catherine.
Hi there. Hi, Joe and Emily and Representative Thomas. So my question is about the rent stabilization bill, and I did comment on the legislative website, but I'm really concerned about that there is no carve out for smallholding landholders or landlords. If I have a second home that I'm renting out as part of my retirement strategy, a 7% rent cap isn't going to cover the annual property tax increases alone. My property taxes on my single residence that I live in went up 9% last year. So a 7% rent cap is not going to cover that. And by imposing that cap on smallholding landlords, what you're actually going to do is force those landlords out of the rental market. And that reduces available housing. So will you please add a carve out for smallholding landlords?
Thank you so much for your question. So first, as background to listeners out there, rent stabilization is a policy that I'm proud to have sponsored this legislative session. And the goal of the policy is to limit excessive rent increases. So we know that about 40% of the constituents in the 34th district are renters. But right now, for those constituents, their rent can go up any amount, 5, 10, 20%. And those really high amounts are destabilizing for renters, older adults who can't move to find a more affordable apartment, or to families whose kids are comfortably in their schools and don't want to pull their schools if their rent goes high. So the goal of this bill is to stop excessive rent increases above 7%, but it lets the landlord set the rent however they'd like, and to even raise the rent year over year. It's a balanced approach that's meant to put some guardrails on there to protect tenants while allowing landlords to operate their properties. Now, I believe that the math works to allow people to raise their rent a modest amount and keep up with inflation and keep up with costs like maintenance and property taxes. We do have an exemption in the bill for properties up to 4 units where one is owner occupied, to give some flexibility to small landlords who live in a property. But again, this is a balanced approach with simple guardrails so that we can give stability and predictability to almost 40% of the people in the district. And I look forward to any more feedback or conversations from others.
All right, Jen, take us to the next one.
All right. So just a reminder to folks listening in, please press 0 on your phone keypad if you'd like to ask your 34th district lawmakers a question. And our next question comes from Jeremy. Jeremy is asking a question about AI disruptions in the workforce and funding education. Go ahead, Jeremy, you are live.
Thanks. Yeah, recently I was reading an article about the very disruptive effect that AI will have upon work opportunities from then beyond. It seems to me our school systems are going to have to provide an education to our young people that will give them the tools in order to deal with this completely disruptive environment they're going to be in. My understanding is that the Constitution of the state requires that the educational system be fully funded. And I understand that quite often the schools are cut short on that fully funding. Do you have any comments as to how they can get that funding up to date and get it adequate for the future demands on our kids? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. The biggest thing by far that the state of Washington spends your tax dollars on is our public school system, the kindergarten through 12th grade public school system. We also spend money on higher education and on childcare, but by far the biggest share of those dollars goes toward our public schools. We have heard from school districts and parents and educators that the current model for funding our public schools, which the legislature passed in 2017, has not kept pace with the cost to school districts to maintain a really strong workforce, whether that is certificated teachers or classified paraeducators who are primarily educating kids with special needs, or any of the other educational and support staff in our public schools. So we have increased funding for public schools every single year since we passed that 2017 education reform bill, but we've heard that it hasn't been enough, and that there are a couple areas, special education being the largest, where our school districts are still struggling to provide to maintain a stable workforce and to provide the class sizes particularly the attention for kids with special needs that we all want for kids in Washington schools. That is why we are absolutely going to be increasing funding for our K-12 education system, particularly for special education in the budget that we passed this year. We also know that we need the school system to prepare kids who go through it for the skills they need to compete in the economies that they will be entering, not just the economies of the past, but the economies of the future. That's why we see computer science education in our public schools. I know that there's interest among some of the educators, including the chair of the Senate Education Committee, in making computer science a graduation requirement. Whether it's a graduation requirement or whether it is just focused resources for our school districts to utilize as they adopt their curriculum. We know that tech-facing jobs, including jobs requiring familiarity with AI and other newer applications of computer science, are going to be absolutely critical. They're particularly critical in Washington's economy because of how important and how hungry for workers our local tech economy is. I don't think this is the kind of problem that lends itself to one solution. It's the kind of thing we're going to have to work towards over the course of many years. And I appreciate you asking the question, too.
And Jeremy, I'd add, while we're building that infrastructure to catch up with technology, we are working to protect workers from disruption of AI in their workplaces. We passed HB 1622 out of the House and sent it over to the Senate, which allows for public sector bargaining on the impacts of AI in the workforce. So we know that bargaining in the private sector is one ball of wax, but we did our best to protect public sector workers from encroachment by AI in their workplaces, ensuring that when you are getting public services, it's indeed from people.
And Jeremy, just to add on a little bit more, you talk about funding public education. There is no doubt education is our paramount duty. And I believe that funding public schools and creating a high quality public education system is really foundational to a thriving democracy. We know we have a lot more work to do to fund our schools. And we know that parents and kids on the ground in our communities are feeling the stresses of underfunding a school. Seattle State felt what it looked like to face potential school closures. Highline feels what under-resourced classrooms feel like. Vashon understands the pain of kids not coming from Seattle or coming from Seattle and what the impact is there. So as Joe mentioned, we're focused on helping to better meet school needs. There are 3 key funding areas that we'll focus on. One, special education. We already passed the bill out of the Senate. That'll go over to the House to help make meaningful investments in special education and lift the arbitrary cap that has been in place that limited how much special education funding we could put out. 2 is to better cover the costs of general operating. Materials and operating costs are going up for schools just like it is for the rest of us in our communities. We passed a bill in the Senate to better fund operating costs. We'll take a look at transportation, and we'll take a look at how local communities can also better use their levy process to invest in public schools. So we are looking at our school investments. We're also passing legislation to make sure that the curriculum in schools keeps up with the needs like in AI. And thanks for your question.
All right. Thank you. We are moving on to the next question. And as a reminder to folks on the line, if you would like to ask your legislators a question, please press 0 on your phone keypad and we'll get you straight in the queue. The next question comes from Casey from Vashon. Casey has a question about funding for state ferries. Go ahead, Casey. You're on the line.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for your time and having this awesome opportunity to interface with your community. My question is about the ferry systems. I am here on Vashon Island. My husband is a daily commuter off island. We are middle income folks. Our daughter is a reverse commuter because she got priced off the island and lives in Tacoma and comes this way to work. And I am self-employed, and the ferry systems have crumbled since the pandemic to the point where fees are exceeding us being able to balance our personal budgets. My question is about the WSF 75 work group who's been, I understand, evaluating our serviceable needs here. I used to be able to give a $25 credit to people coming to utilize my services here on island. However, my own income has dwindled dramatically because people are not able to catch a ferry. They are spending in the summer and Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they are spending more than 3 hours trying to just get up and back for a 1-hour appointment. And I was wondering if you could talk about what you all are doing to address the ferry needs. Is there anything in the works for residential or discounted residential breaks instead of us paying more in summer like we are tourists?
Well, thanks for the question, Casey. Big question. Starting at the top level, yeah, we need to fix our ferry system. And there are significant changes that we need to make. Some take a long time. Some we can make with more immediate action. As you've heard recently, Governor Ferguson announced that they'll return the 3-boat service to Vashon in June. That will help address some of the challenges that folks on island and off island have been facing. So that's important. And we know that long term, we're going to have to continue to invest in maintenance and in new boats in order to continue to maintain service. We also know that we've been facing for many years workforce challenges, both in recruitment and retention, and that in order to keep enough crew so that we don't have delays and cancellations, we need to continue to double down on things we've done over the last few years, including increasing some of the crew on boats, including investments in maritime academy and training, including helping to pay for workers on the ferries who want to help get into other lanes in our ferry system and to make sure that we're paying for their training so that they can do that. So our workforce investments are paying off. We need to continue to make those investments. We also know that in general, our transportation budget is underwater, and we need to continue to look at ways to better get revenue to fund our transportation system as a whole. And that's something that we'll continue to do. As you know, some of us have advocated to continue to have water taxi service while Vashon and the state is facing challenges with the ferry system. And I know I'll continue to advocate for water taxi service so that people can get on and off island in a more affordable way.
Yeah, and Casey, I really appreciate this question because I think for all islanders on Vashon and Maury, whether you're a daily commuter or not, as you noted, Casey, everyone in your family is impacted by the unreliability of the ferry system in a different way. As Emily said, we have a couple long-term problems with the ferry fleet. One is that most of the vessels are too old, and we need new boats to be built. We have new vessels being built, but it takes a couple of years to get those through the shipyard and to be tested on the water and to be able to be put into service. We also have a workforce shortage. We kind of had a workforce shortage even before the pandemic, but the pandemic really accelerated that because of the number of people who retired from the ferry system, like a lot of workplaces during the pandemic. And again, it takes a couple of years to get folks interested in working on the water and then trained and Coast Guard certified to work on the water. So those are challenges that we have been investing heavily in recruiting people to work on the water, in building the vessels, but it is frustratingly slow. That said, we are going to have 3-boat service back on the Triangle route starting this summer. And I really want to give a shout out to Senator Alvarado for her work in securing funding in last year's budget to contract with the King County Ferry District to add additional runs on the King County water taxi between Vashon and downtown Seattle to provide some midday service to increase the ability of Vashon commuters to downtown Seattle to make use of that option. That was a really great way for us to use existing infrastructure and existing staffing, although not at the state ferry system, at the King County ferry system, to meet a need that we have heard loud and clear from islanders. So again, not a complete solution, but a really positive short-term solution while we work to get the full state ferry fleet at the service level that that islanders and people in ferry communities around Puget Sound deserve.
All right. Please press 0 if you have a question for your 34th District state lawmakers. We are now going to take a question from Charles. Charles has a question about the governor's budget proposal and state employee furloughs. Go ahead, Charles.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. So I'm 11-year state service with DCYF, and we have found ourselves every year for the last 5-10 years asked to do more and more with less and less, to the point that I am not able to think at all about how the governor's proposed monthly furloughs will impact the services to children that are at risk of harm and families that are trying to access behavioral health services to reunify with their children or prevent their children from being placed into relative or foster care, when we're going to take the whole state workforce and so I'm very concerned about the proposal from the governor to try to balance the budget on the backs of these families that we're trying to serve. So I'm wondering, will you all commit today to a budget that does not furlough employees and instead tries to, I've heard you talk about progressive revenue. We have extremely wealthy people in this state that pay a fraction of their of the tax burden that the poorest people in this state do. So will you commit to a budget that doesn't involve furloughs on those essential services?
But thank you for that question, Charles. I think your question gets to the core of what we're dealing with down here in Olympia. And this is not a dollars and cents data point question. This is a human services, community support, Washingtonian to Washingtonian problem. You work for DCYS because you care about kids and you care about families. And you're looking at this cuts all your approach. And the thing you didn't ask us about was what it meant just for your paycheck. You asked us what it meant for those families. And those are the decisions that we are having to make every day. I met with Representative Gregerson recently, and she asked me when I submitted budget ads, will this save lives? That is literally how we are looking at the budget this year. Is this a life-saving investment? And if not, can we please ask you, Rep. Thomas, to maybe wait till we're in a better position? So that's why you hear us talk so much about the importance of progressive revenue this year. You're right. There's plenty of money in Washington. We just can't get our hands on it. And it's very frustrating. We know that we have a robust, healthy economy that could be serving all of Washingtonians. And I think that we are to the place with questions like yours, questions about real families in Washington really suffering in the absence of those options, is what's giving us the political will to stand up and say, we can't do cuts only. Not just for those families we're serving, but for your family too, Charles. You're the one that's most likely to be impacted immediately by those furloughs. I can't promise you that is it a situation where there won't be a single furlough day. That's just not a promise I can make right now. But I can promise you we're doing everything we can to avoid that having to be the only option.
Yeah, Charles, I'll just echo what Rep. Thomas said. Like, state employee furloughs don't just impact the people being furloughed; they impact the people who count on you for the work that you do. And I think your work in caring for kids who are in the foster care system or are potentially in a dangerous situation at home just shows how the risks to Washingtonians that come from making poorly thought out choices in the state budget. I don't know that we can really take anything off the table right now because of the size of our budget shortfall, but I know that as we have looked at budget reduction options, I don't personally think that state employee furloughs are worth the risk to people in the care of the state, like children in the foster care system. Again, our budget shortfall is really large, and we are already working overtime in order to secure progressive revenue that asks the wealthiest in our state to pay their fair share so that we don't end up having to make choices that threaten the safety of kids in the foster care system.
I don't have much to add, Charles, but thanks for all you do to help kids in our community. And we're going to be fighting over here in Olympia to get resources in a more progressive way so we can continue those investments in the outcomes and in the people who serve our community. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you, Senator Alvarado. If you have a question for the lawmakers, please press 0 on your phone keypad. Our next question is from Christina. Christina has a question about education and the federal government's policies. Go ahead, Christina.
Hello, Senator and Representatives. Thanks for taking my call. But thanks for your support of the education system. I'm a school social worker on Gratiot Island. And I want to thank you for supporting 5123, supporting inclusivity for students and their safety at school. My question is, do you feel like this law is enough to protect us from discriminatory federal policies that are coming down? And I appreciate our legislators' support of that inclusivity. However, being aware of the threats of the federal government to discontinue funding for states that send up students like that, do we have a plan to address the possible impact of losing the 79% of federal funding? Thanks very much for taking my call.
Thank you so much for your question, Christina. I'll jump in since this bill has only just passed the Senate. Was proud to support this legislation because I do think it takes steps to better define the protected classes of people who can't be discriminated against in our public schools, to include things like ethnicity and homelessness and immigration status and neurodivergence, and to make sure that we're standing up for people who otherwise could really be threatened, targeted, and at risk given what's happening at the federal level. I don't think that this one bill is enough, though, for sure. What we're facing at the federal level is significant. I'm proud that on issues where our Washingtonians are under attack, we've seen the Attorney General, for example, file lawsuits to stop federal actions that would harm people here. And we'll need to continue to support the Attorney General and his office in that effort to defend Washingtonians. But this is one piece of our commitment to shore up the civil rights protections for people here as we face these threats. As a social worker, as someone in the schools, I do encourage anyone who sees youth in our community being threatened, we need to speak up now and make sure that we're doing everything possible to protect people. This is one tool. It's not going to be enough, but we'll need to keep fighting to protect people's rights here in Washington.
What's next, Jen?
All right. Our next question is from the pre-submitted questions that were collected prior to the event. This question is, will you support safer streets for people walking or riding bicycles by co-sponsoring Representative Reed's presumed liability bill, HB 1518, next session?
Well, this is Emily speaking. I support Rep. Lee's bill. Sorry, that wasn't moving this session. What I can say is we did move out of the Senate a bill that I sponsored that would let local communities create what are called shared streets, where cities can designate streets where pedestrians and bicyclists and vehicles could share the same street, where local governments could drop the speed limit to 10 miles per hour, and where it sets out that priority of pedestrians first, then micromobility, and then vehicles, and starts to give more tools to local governments so that we can create safe and shared streets. It's not the same thing, but we do have to take more steps to keep pedestrians and bicyclists safe in our communities, and that's one example of a way that we can do that. And yes, I would support this legislation in the future.
I would support it too. I appreciate you bringing our attention to it. That bill didn't pass out of the committee that it was referred to, that either Rep. Thomas or I serve on, but one of the very first bills I ever introduced when I was elected to the House of Representatives all the way back in 2011 was a bill to create a new, more strict civil infraction for the crime of endangering the bodily harm of a vulnerable user on the roadway, which defined vulnerable user as a pedestrian or bicyclist. And that was a step in the right direction. This bill takes a different approach rather than the civil infraction approach of legal liability, allowing somebody injured or by a vehicle to sue in court. I think that we know that our roadways are not safe enough for all users, particularly for vulnerable users like pedestrians and bicyclists. We're doing a lot to invest in safer streets, including the bill that Senator Alvarado mentioned, but also in investments through our Climate Commitment Act dollars in safe walking and biking infrastructure and in bicycle education in our public schools. So again, this is one that I think is going to take a lot of solutions, including the solution proposed in this liability bill.
And on a lighter note, I am not the most gracious creature in this district, but should I ever decide to get on a bicycle, I certainly hope that not only I, but all of our neighbors have these sorts of protections. All right, Jen, where are we going next?
All right. Thank you, Representative. Our next question is coming from Roxanne. Roxanne has a question about renewable energy. Go ahead, Roxanne.
Hello. So I have my question is basically currently the Sierra Club has submitted testimony during this session and have come out fully in opposition to a new nuclear energy because it is not clean and it is not renewable and it is exceedingly costly and runs years behind. In addition to that, we are currently leaking radioactive waste consistently and constantly into the Columbia River. About a year ago, Governor Inslee gave $25 million for the study of small modular nuclear reactors at Hanford. That was, before that was given, the governor received multiple letters from First Nations leaders in the state of Washington asking him to not do that. Small modular nuclear reactors have been studied since the 1950s and have been proven consistently to not be effective, not clean, etc. So my question is, are you focusing on actual clean and renewable energy, wind, water, solar, and geothermal? And how are you doing that if you are? Or what can we do to help you do that? Thank you.
Thanks, Roxanne. I would say that our focus on our energy systems is to transition away from fossil fuels as fast as possible because fossil fuels are endangering all of our well-being, causing worse wildfires, worse flooding, worse heat events, rising sea levels, impacting agriculture with droughts, and are causing millions of deaths around the world as we see more frequent and more severe extreme weather events. So my highest priority by far is that we move away from oil, coal, and gas as sources of energy. There are risks with nuclear energy, just like there are risks with any form of energy, any large industrial development. We know that there are impacts, potential impacts on bird habitat in Eastern Washington from Lakewood solar development too. We have to mitigate those risks the best ways we can. But the one non-negotiable for me is that we need to stop emitting greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. And I don't agree with the Sierra Club on this issue.
Next.
All right. Thank you. If you have a question for your state lawmakers, please press 0. Our next question is from Pina. Pina has a question about taxing storage units. Pina, go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call. Guess first of all, English is my second language, so I'll be a little slow. So I wanted to know where you stand on the House Bill 1907 and the Senate Bill 5711, which wants to put a tax of up to 10.6% on storage units, which targets military members and families that use the storage when deployed or serving abroad, small businesses that serve our community. They already pay sales tax and B&O tax. And then there are people that I was involved with Washington Community Action Network. I was elected on the Leadership Council in 2013 through 16.
And I basically was involved because of the illegal foreclosures, where I also know disabled Vietnam veterans that had to use those storages because they have no choice, because they have to give up their home, they were foreclosed on. So I wanted to know where you stand on that. I mean, it seems like ridiculous that there should be a tax on storage.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I want to start by saying that I'm fourth generation from a military family. Everybody in my family bleeds green, and we believe in public service, and we appreciate those that feel the same. I appreciate the distinct challenges for military families that have to move every 18, 36, 42 months to continue to be part of that continuum of service. However, with that being said, we are in a crisis when it comes to access to housing. We have more housing for stuff than we do humans. In America right now, there are 2-to-1 storage units for every American, 2-to-1. That means we have successfully figured out how to protect things more successfully than we are protecting humans. And I know you've heard us say over and over tonight that we are in a revenue crisis. Again, we are making decisions every day to keep people alive and to keep them housed. We have to look at every tool that is available to us until we right-size our tax code. Again, we're behind Idaho and Oregon on this issue. So I appreciate that 10% per month per unit is an additional hardship, particularly for those experiencing housing instability, particularly for our service members. We do have to make decisions that are best for all of Washington. And I think this is one of those opportunities. But I thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, this is Emily speaking. I would just add that storage units currently enjoy more beneficial tax policies than other things. They are exempt from B&O tax, and there was not a retail sales and use tax charged on their rent. So right now, it is one of the options that's on the table so that we can get resources for affordable housing. We don't, in the state of Washington, have any dedicated revenue source to create and invest in affordable housing in our communities. And I think this was one creative option to help generate a small amount of resource that we can invest in more people in Washington having a home that they can afford. Take us to the next one, Jen.
All right. The next question is from Melissa in West Seattle. Melissa has a question about national board stipends for educators. Go ahead, Melissa.
Hi, thank you. So piggybacking on a couple of comments from earlier, I liked what Jeremy asked about funding for education and what Charles shared about the impact of those furlough days on our social workers in the state. And I was wondering if we could get a commitment from you about the proposal to not cut the national board stipend. National board stipend goes to our highly trained, highly qualified educators, and I am a school counselor. And we talk about wanting access to high quality and rigor in our schools. And cutting the national board stipend, I think, would really limit the opportunities for those of us who want to accelerate our career and show what we know, and that we're there to do that for students. And so I was just wondering if we could hear your commitment on whether or not that you will oppose the cut to the national board stipend. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Melissa. This is Emily speaking as the daughter of 2 public school educators and the mom of 2 public school kids. I care so much about investing in our teachers. And I have talked to so many folks from the district. I've heard a lot on this issue. I recognize that the national board stipend is an important part of recruitment and retention. I know and I'm sure Joe and Brianna will be fighting hard to try to keep these stipends. It's a tough time to commit to saying that they will be cut.
But I think two things are guiding my view on this. One is I think it's a moral obligation that we protect the stipends that are going to teachers who are teaching in the highest poverty schools. And we need to make sure that we're not losing highly qualified teachers from those schools. And I think that we need to make sure that we're advocating for more revenue. These are exactly the types of commitment of investments that we should be able to continue to make in our community. And it's going to take more resources for us to do so. So we'll be fighting hard. It's a tough time in session to commit that it won't be cut, but it's a priority for us to keep fighting for.
And you can't see it, but Joe and I are both nodding vigorously. All right, Jen, what do we got with the time we've got left?
All right. This is our last question. It is from the pre-submitted batch that came in before the event. This question says, thank you for sponsoring these bills. Since House Bill 1881, Senate Bill 5704 didn't get a hearing, how can we stop the conservative religious and private equity takeover of healthcare systems in Washington?
Thank you for that question. This legislation that this question refers to is about giving the state attorney general more oversight to ask hard questions about mergers in hospital systems. We know that a lot of hospitals have merged in different communities across the Washington state, and sometimes that leads to certain healthcare services like end-of-life care or gender-affirming care or abortion not being offered in those healthcare facilities anymore. There's also impacts to healthcare affordability as we see a smaller number of healthcare systems control access to healthcare and have monopolies on healthcare access in communities. That drives up prices as well. This legislation did receive a hearing this year. Unfortunately, it did not have the votes needed to move out of the committee that it was referred to. So I think I have two answers to this question. One is we need to keep up the pressure. And so part of that pressure is you asking questions like this and continuing to ask legislators how we're going to make progress on ensuring strong oversight of our healthcare systems and ensuring access and affordability wherever we can. The other thing I can report on a positive note is that when we didn't get this piece of legislation through this year, we did pass a piece of legislation out of the House that's now in the Senate that gives the state more visibility into the finances and the ownership of these healthcare systems. So the question around private equity takeovers, we'll have better information that we can use to inform our policymaking efforts on this in the future if this bill does make it through the Senate and becomes law. So unfortunately, our legislative process is often a game of increments, not getting the full policy goal achieved right away. But I am hopeful that once we have more transparency into hospital systems finances, that will give us better information that we need to really oversee them and protect patients and their access to care.
All right, that is all the time we have for tonight's event. Thank you for taking part in this telephone town hall. If you did not get your question answered, please don't hang up just yet. You'll have the opportunity to leave a voicemail that the legislators will get. I'm going to turn it over to them one more time for some closing remarks. And thank you again from your 34th District legislators.
Thank you all for continuing to listen to us. 107 you are still there. So we appreciate you tuning in tonight and getting an update from us here at Olympia. This is Rep. Thomas, your newest rep. It has been the most challenging thing I've ever done in my whole entire life, this new job of mine. But it's also been the most gratifying. I've been able to stand with immigrants, and I've been able to stand with members of our indigenous communities. And I've learned a lot about the Theories and their service to Vashon. I know more than I could ever imagine about the creation of a just budget And I am deeply, deeply impressed by how many of you are willing to drive down I-5 in the middle of winter to talk to me for 15 minutes about what's so, so, so important to you. So keep those emails coming, keep those phone calls coming, keep the pressure on, because we are at the halfway point, folks. We've got a whole nother half of this session to go, and we're going to need your help to get through it. Thank you so much.
Again, this is Representative Joe Fitzgibbon. Just would thank you again for your time conversing with us tonight and asking us some really great questions, and would just thank you for the honor of representing you and our community in Olympia.
Thank you all. This is Emily Alvarado closing us out. It is an absolute privilege to represent you all in Olympia. We'll be down here fighting for you, fighting for our schools, for healthcare, for good jobs, for a fair tax code, and for the civil rights and protections that our communities always deserve, but now more than ever. Please always feel free to reach out to share your perspective